Welcome to another episode of the Inner Guidebook, and today I want to go straight into it because I'm so keen on speaking about this topic. I'm so excited to speak about this topic because once you understand it, once you know how to use it or why you're doing it, life becomes so much more of a relief and it becomes so much easier to go through it, to live through it. And today's topic of the Inner Guidebook is forgiveness. Why to forgive and how to forgive. And there are a lot of misconceptions around forgiveness. We understand it wrongly. We think we're doing it for the wrong reasons. And today I just want to touch on so many ways you can forgive and the reasons to forgive and how it really is for you more than it is for the other person. It's for you more than it is for that other thing that you are trying to move on from. And the first reason I'm going to touch on is that forgiveness brings emotional liberation. The liberation you feel, the relief you feel, and the emotions you let go of once you start forgiving is, I think, unmatched. Once you start realizing how to forgive and why you're forgiving. And so change your approach to forgiveness. Forgiving someone doesn't mean you condone their behavior. These are two separate things because we think we forgive others for them when really we forgive others for us. We think we forgive others for them when really we forgive others for us. And this is where the misconception is. There's a misconception where we think if we forgive someone quick or if we forgive someone easily, we let them off the hook. That's what we think. We think when we forgive someone, we let them off the hook when really, when we forgive them, we're letting ourselves off their hook. When you forgive someone, you let yourself off their hook. You're not letting them off the hook because the more we hold on to what they did, the more we let what they did hold on to us. The more we hold on to what they did, the more we let what they did hold on to us, affect us, change us, control us. And that's what stops us from moving past it. That's what stops us from moving forward. And what stops us from taking that perspective of we're forgiving for us and not for them is that we're too focused on the other person. We're too focused on what they are going to do, how they are going to feel. This is where I want to say, or I want you to try, just don't focus on having them learn their lesson. Rather, focus on you learning yours. We're too focused on how guilty we want to make them feel, how sad we want to make them feel, how bad we want to make them feel from something they did to us. When really, if they learn from something they did to us, we're doing them a favor. If we don't learn from something that happened to us, we're not doing ourselves that favor of taking accountability, of growing, of moving forward, of knowing what we tolerate, what we don't tolerate. So them learning their lesson will change nothing in your life, especially long term. Because if they learn their lesson, you're doing them that favor. So do yourself that favor. Do yourself that favor of learning your lesson from what they did to you. It happened to you. It's your lesson to learn from. It's your lesson to go through. So why let them control us? Why let them control you? They've controlled you enough. It's time for you to control yourself. And you don't do that by trying to control them back. You don't control yourself the most by trying to control someone else. You don't control what happened to you by trying to control what's going to happen to someone else. Forgiveness is a slingshot experience. The more you hold on to that grudge, the more you hold on to what they did to you, the more you're not forgiving, the more you're being held back. They're the band, you're the stone, and they're pulling you back the more you hold on to them. But once you forgive, this is where the slingshot experience really comes to play. Once you forgive, you're that stone, they're that band in that slingshot experience where the stone goes forward and the band is left behind. They don't come with you. This is where they stop. You forgive them, you let them go, you forget about them. They don't go where you're going because you forgive them. You've done yourself that favor. You've learned your lesson. So that brings me to my next reason, my next why you should forgive. And so much self-esteem and so much self-confidence comes from forgiveness. And the way to do that and how to do that is to expect them to be them. Self-awareness and self-esteem go hand in hand in forgiveness. The more self-aware you become, the easier you forgive, the higher your self-confidence becomes before you forgive and even after you forgive. Why you forgive and why you should forgive, you're just so confident in it because you're so self-aware. And the more aware you are, the more confident you are. The more confident you are, the more aware you are. They go hand in hand with forgiveness. The only way to become more self-aware is to go through situations that show you what you tolerate and what you don't. So you can't expect from yourself to be more aware. You can't expect from yourself to be more aware, to know more about yourself, to know what you tolerate, what you don't, if you don't go through difficult experiences of learning the hard way sometimes what you don't tolerate and what you do. This is what brings the self-awareness, that phase of having to forgive someone, that phase of going through something and having to forgive them. That's what brings us that self-awareness. So the only way to learn from it is to forgive, because that's the only way you're truly moving on. So expect them to be them. That's how you increase that self-esteem for forgiveness. That's how you increase that self-confidence, is to expect them to be them. Deep down, you know them. We always knew them. We know their attributes. We know how they are. We know who they are. We know what they do. Deep down, we always know it. So when they show you, believe them. When they show you who they are, believe them. Expect the big mouth to talk. Expect the two-faced to betray. Expect the liar to lie, and expect the backstabber to twist. Expect them to be them. Everybody has a role. Everybody has a job, and deep down they've shown you before who they are. They've been showing you who they are. They've shown some attributes, and deep down you know that this person can do that thing. We're just surprised when it happens to us. We're most surprised when it happens to us. Most of the times, we're really surprised when we really shouldn't be. We've known them. We've expected them to do that, but we just never expected them to do it to us. That's where the surprise comes from. We're not surprised from what they did. Deep down, we've always known they could do that, but we've never thought that they could do it to us. So when someone does that to you, don't cut them off. When someone does what you never thought they would do to you, don't cut them off, but cut their level. Cut where they stand. Because cutting them off takes a toll on you. But cutting where they stand only takes a toll on them. Cutting them off takes a toll on you, but cutting where they stand takes a toll only on them. Because now you know. Now you're more self-aware. You know what you tolerate, what you don't. If I had a very close friend, a best friend, and they used to be at this level in my life, and they did something I never expected them to do. I never expected them to do to me. I've always known them to do. I've always known he was a big mouth. I've always known he's two-faced. I've always known that person changes around people, talks about people, but I've never thought they would do that to me. I don't cut them off. I just cut where they stand. You were here, now you're here. You were there, now you're there. So keep them in your life. Keep them in your life, but exactly as far as you want them to be, and exactly where you want them to be. Don't take them completely away from your life. That's a burden you will carry. That's the sadness you will carry. That's the overthinking you will keep thinking about a situation. You will keep saying, what if I kept them? What if I didn't? What if I didn't cut them off? So don't cut them off. Change where they stand. Keep them in your life, but exactly where you want them to be, and exactly as far as you want them to be. And the way to do that when forgiving someone, the way to do that when you're letting them back into your life, or when you're not kicking them out of your life, is to know who deserves how much of you. Give them just as much as you are comfortable with them talking about. Give each person you know, give each person that's close to you, depending on how close they are, depending on how much they've earned out of you, give them just as much as you are comfortable with that person talking about. Give them just as much as they deserve out of you, as much as they've earned out of you. Not any more, not any less. So then if someone that you don't want to talk talks, what can they really be talking about? What can they really be talking about if all you've given them is as much as you want them to know, as much as they deserve to know? So if you've given someone 50%, because that person only deserves, you're only comfortable with 50% of your life to that person, what can they really be talking about? What can they really be gossiping about? What can they really be backstabbing you about when all they know about you is 50%? So know who deserves how much of you. Know who's earned how much of you. And that's what leads to my next point. That's what leads to my next why. Because with forgiveness, the more you do it, the easier it becomes. And the more you do it, the more you start letting go of resentment. You start letting go of so much resentment from people. And the way to do it is to work around them. Work with them. Don't try to work and go through them. It's easier to forgive them once you start adapting to how they are, not trying to change how they are. Accept them for how they already come, not how you want them to be. The resentment that's worse than the one met once is the one that builds up. The resentment that's worse than the one that's met once is the one that keeps building up. And the less we push to forgive, the more resentment we build up. Not only for the other person, but for ourselves as well. The more we hold on to that grudge, the more we hold on to what they did, the more we start blaming ourselves for it. The more we start not forgiving ourselves for what they did to us. Not forgiving ourselves for what led to them doing what they did to us. So the less we push to forgive, the more resentment we build. Forget them. You build that resentment also for yourself. And we've all been there. Instead of forgiving and letting go of the resentment along with them, we become moody. We feel upset all the time, angry all the time. You get trapped in those thoughts of how it should have been or how it could have been. So remind yourself. Remind yourself of who they are, not who they should be. Remind yourself of how they are, not how they should be, not how you wanted them to be. not who you wanted them to be. Remind yourself of who they are and how they are, how they already came when you started dealing with them. So once they do something to you that you didn't want them to do, that they shouldn't have done, this is who they are. This is how they are. And you've known it. Focus on teaching yourself how to cope with it, not how you'll teach them to cope with you. So teach yourself how you'll cope with them, not how you'll teach them to cope with you. So work around them, work with them. Don't try to go through them and change them and make them the way you want them to be. Make them the way they should be. And it's okay. It's okay. Expect that your emotions will have you reacting differently at different times. Expect that your emotions will have you reacting differently at different times. And that's fine. It's natural. It's okay. Because as time moves past it, I want you to let your emotions move past it as well. As time moves past it, how about you try to let your emotions move past it as well? And then, and only then, once you've taught yourself how to let your emotions pass as time passes too, remind yourself of forgiving them. Remind yourself that you're forgiving them not for them, but for you. You're forgiving them for what you expected them to do, anyways, for what you deep down knew they could do, anyways. So learn to adapt to them, learn to adapt to it. Don't erase them, learn to adapt to them. Don't erase them from your life. Again, don't cut them off, cut where they stand. That's where the forgiveness really comes. Why hold on to that hate? Why have someone hate you and you hate someone? Why have someone hate you and you hate them? Why have someone be upset at you and you be upset at them? Why hold on to all those negative emotions when all you have to do is cut where they stand in your life? And that pushes into the next reason why we should forgive. Holding on to those emotions, going through a lot of emotions when having to forgive, you will start to feel more empathy and more compassion towards people the more you start to forgive. The easier you start to forgive, the more you'll start to feel the empathy and the compassion. Because there's a huge misconception around it. We don't know that thing that I'm about to talk about. We don't really understand it, or we don't know it, so we don't remember it, or we're not reminded by it. And I'm here to remind you that between the reaction and the action, there is always your perception. Between the reaction and the action, there's perception. How we understand the other person's perspective will better facilitate forgiveness. So, how we better understand the other person's perspective will better facilitate forgiveness. We often think that it's their actions and our reactions that lead to the problem. We forget about our perception of their action. That's what leads to our reaction. Our perception of their actions is what leads to our action, not our reaction to it. Again, between reaction and action, the real cause of the problem, the real cause of anger, the real cause of sadness is the perception of the situation. It's our perception of their actions that decide our reaction. How we perceive not what they did, but why they did it will decide our state of mind, will decide our mood, will decide our approach. So how we perceive not what they did, because what they did it. What they did is what they did, but why they did it, how we perceive why they did that, is what changes our reaction, is what decides our reaction. It's what decides our mind. It's what decides our state of mind. It's what decides our mood. It's what decides what we will do about it. So favor the perception that will calm you. Favor the perception that will calm you to forgive them. Favor the perception that will bring you to forgive them. And of course, it's easier said than done, but it's the small stuff. It's the simple stuff, as me texting someone and they don't reply to me. How I perceive why they did that will decide how upset about it I get, or how upset at them I get. If I keep telling myself this person isn't answering my texts because they're trying to ignore me, because they don't want to talk to me, that will build up that resentment, that will build up that anger. It will make it harder to forgive them. But if I text someone and they don't reply, if I call someone and they don't answer, and I say to myself, they're busy. They're busy working, they're busy with their family, they're busy and they will call me later. That's what I'll tell myself. That's how I perceive why they didn't pick up, why they aren't answering my texts. They'll call me later. They're busy now. They're busy with their family. They're busy with work. That eliminates so much resentment, eliminates so much anger. And of course, it's easier said than done, but the way to do that is to always give the benefit of the doubt. Always give the benefit of the doubt. Always give the benefit of the doubt. The benefit of the doubt doesn't fool you. The benefit of the doubt fuels you. It saves you. It saves you from the overthinking. It saves you from so much wasted energy. Energy that you can put into forgiveness. Energy that you could put into moving on. So the benefit of the doubt fuels you. Stops you from the overthinking. Stops you from the wasted energy. Energy that you will need to put into forgiveness and moving on. By giving them the benefit of the doubt and learning where they stand, you now forgive them easier. And it gets much harder for you to get upset. So it gets easier to forgive and harder to get upset. And that leads into my next point. My next why, my next reason for forgiveness. And that's forgiveness brings and forgiveness attracts healthier relationships. How you can do that is become the one who loses enemies and wins friends. Forgiveness attracts healthier relationships, but the way to do that is to try to become the one who loses enemies and wins friends. Forgiveness can really be the source of not only healthier relationships, but also more stable and constant relationships. Each relationship in your life plays a role, and each person in your life has their time. So each relationship in your life plays a role, and each person in your life has their time. Forgiving them doesn't mean you let them in or that you're letting them in again. Forgiving them can also mean you're keeping them at bay. You're keeping them at surface level. Because the weight of hating someone and someone hating you, being upset at someone and someone being upset at you, that weight is not worth its cost. The weight of you hating someone, someone hating you, you being upset at someone and someone being upset at you, that weight you will carry, that burden you will carry, is not worth its cost. And there's a really good quote from Mike Tyson. That quote shows you the knowledge, shows you the understanding of being the one who loses enemies but wins friends. And that quote says, everybody you fight is not your enemy, and everybody that helps you is not your friend. Everybody you fight is not your enemy, and everybody that helps you is not your friend. And so when I say lose enemies and win friends, I mean lose the enemy from them and win the friend in them. Lose the enemy from them and win the friend in them. But in both cases, keep them. When someone does something to you, or they keep showing you a side that you don't like, they keep showing you the enemy in them, don't erase them, but try to win the friend in them. Try to take away the enemy from them and win the friend in them. And the only way to do that is to easily forgive the enemy in them. That's where the benefit of the doubt plays out. Not in what they did to you, but in why they did it. Give them the benefit of the doubt. Give them that benefit of the doubt, and that's where it plays a part. Embarrass them with your kindness. That's the beautiful thing about forgiveness. Forgiveness is so good for you, but it also embarrasses the other person with your kindness. If you want the other person to really feel some sort of way, don't focus on them feeling upset or guilty about what they did to you, because you're not going to be able to control that. But control the one thing you can, which is to embarrass them with your kindness. Embarrass them with your kindness in forgiving them. There are always more advantages in forgiveness than in holding grudges. There are always more advantages in forgiveness than in holding grudges. Forgive and forget to properly move on. We hear it all the time, but we misunderstand it. We try to implement it all the time, but we don't properly know how to, because we don't properly understand it. So forgive and forget to properly move on. Forgive them, forget the grudge, but never forget what they did in the first place. So you forgive them, you forget the grudge, but you don't forget what they did in the first place. Forgive and forget the emotions it made you feel, the pain it brought, the tears it caused. Forgive and forget it all, but not for them, for you. Forget those emotions, forget the pain, forget the tears, forget the grudge, not for them, but for you. That's why you will forgive and forget in the first place. That's why you will forgive and forget what they did to you, but not forget that they did it to begin with. You forgive what they did because of the grudge, because of the pain, because of the sadness, the tears. But you don't forget that they did it to begin with, because that's what changes their level. That's what cuts where they stand. That's what keeps them at bay and at surface level once you forgive them and they try to come back into your life. That's what keeps you from giving too much. That's what keeps you from giving too much to them again. More than they deserve, more than they've earned. And that leads to the next why, the next reason to forgive. And we need to know that forgiveness is so essential to improve the relationships in our lives. The friendships, the work relationships, the romantic relationships. Forgiveness is so important to improve those relationships. And how we can do that is to always remind ourselves that now we know. Whatever they do to us, however they did it to us, now we know. The goal in life is to always reach the best version of yourself. The best relationship you can have, the best person you can have, the best friendship you can have. And so now you know when someone does something to you and you are struggling to forgive them, just remind yourself that now you know. Thank you for letting me know. Now you know who to avoid. Now you know what to avoid. Now you know how to avoid it and how it will make you feel if you are put in the situation again and couldn't avoid it. Now you know. Now you know so much about that other person, but more importantly, so you know so much about yourself. What you don't tolerate, what you want to avoid, what you don't want to happen. But you also know that if you don't avoid it, if it happens again, you know how it will make you feel. You know how to control it. You know how much of a toll it might take, and you know how to control that. So forgive them. Forgive them. Let them go. Let them go so you can be let go. So you can properly move on. So you can properly forgive and forget and learn from that lesson. But remind yourself when you're struggling to forgive that if you never forgive, you'll never truly know. You'll never truly know how to move on from it. You'll never truly know enough about yourself in that situation. So forgive them, let them go properly so you can move on, so you can move forward. Forgive them again, not for them. You're not letting them off the hook. You're letting yourself off their hook. Forgive them for you, not for them. The biggest part of going through the lesson, the biggest part of the lesson in what you are trying to forgive or who you are trying to forgive is to move on. That's the biggest part. That's the biggest struggle. Sometimes the struggle of moving on is even more difficult than the struggle of forgiving. Sometimes we forgive them, but we struggle more in moving on. So know that the biggest part of the lesson and what you are trying to forgive or who you are trying to forgive is to actually move on. If you don't move on, you didn't properly and fully learn the lesson. Nor did you properly and fully forgive them and yourself. If you are struggling to move on after you think you've forgiven them, you didn't properly forgive them. Or you didn't properly forgive yourself. You're not forgiving yourself properly. You're not forgiving them properly. So forgive them, truly forgive yourself properly, and it will be much easier to move on. Forgiveness brings emotional well-being. And that's the next reason. That's the next why to forgive, is to know that forgiveness brings that emotional well-being. And how to do that is to practice a theory where everyone has a job. Think of everyone and what they do and why they do it as if it's their job. Everyone has a job. I call it the everyone has a job theory. And that theory was introduced to me by my mental performance coach. And my mental performance coach taught me that theory where everyone has a job. Learning to forgive others for their mistakes makes you learn how to forgive yourself for your mistakes. Sometimes it's even the same mistakes. So when you learn to forgive others for it, when it's easier to forgive others for it, it becomes easier to forgive yourself for it. You start forgiving yourself more for it. Usually we make the same mistakes that we are struggling to forgive in others, but when we start forgiving them, we start forgiving ourselves. And that's where the emotional well-being plays a part. The more you understand and forgive others, the more you'll start to understand yourself for your mistakes and forgive them too. So the more you start to understand and forgive others, the more you'll start to understand yourself for your mistakes and forgive them too. Everyone has a job. Everyone has a job and everyone needs their job just as you do and need yours. The person who talks, that's their job. The person who gossips, the person who talks, that's their job. That's how I want you to think of people now. When you are dealing with people, when you have a friendship with someone, a relationship with someone, or if it's just outsiders, if it's just naysayers, whatever it is, everyone has a job. The person who talks, that's their job. The person who criticizes, that's their job. The backstabber, that's their job. Let everyone do their job. Just let them be. You know them. You truly know them deep down. But that's their job. The critic, their job. The backstabber, their job. The one who talks, the two-faced, the social climber, everything. That's their job. And they need their job just as much as you need yours. And they do their job just as you do yours. Your job now is to forgive. Your job now is to care about yourself, your own emotional well being. That's your job. Your job is to forgive, because if you don't forgive, if you don't do your job, you won't be able to move on and do better. You won't be able to move on and do more and find better. If you don't properly forgive, if you don't properly forgive, if you don't properly let them go, let go of that grudge, you won't ever move on to do better, and you won't ever move on to find better. When speaking about moving on to do better, when speaking about forgiving them to move on to do better, to find better, we need to know that forgiveness is so important when we are trying to let go of the past. We need to forgive so we let go of the past. And that's another why. That's the next reason. Forgiveness makes you let go of the past. And you do that by treating them as they treat you. But again, there is a misconception in the idea of treating them as they treat you. This is not directed for people. The saying of treat them as they treat you is not only directed at people. That's where the misconception is. It's not directed only for the people. Actually, it's least directed to the people. Treat them as they treat you. I'm speaking about treating the time and the moments of that memory as they will treat you. Moments and time pass on. Moments and time pass on and move forward regardless of how you feel. Regardless of how and if you will even move on with them. So treat the time and the moment of that memory exactly how it will treat you. That moment, that time will move on regardless of if you will even move on with it. Regardless of how you will move on with it. So treat it with that same energy. Treat it with that same energy. Treat it with that same mindset. Time and moments wait for no one. Time and moments wait for no one. But also have the mindset that people too wait for no one. So not only will the time and the moment move on, not caring about you, how you will feel, how you will move on after, but people also wait for no one. The time and the moment waits for no one, and people too wait for no one. So treat them with that same energy. Treat the people who you are struggling to forgive, who you are struggling to let go, who you are struggling to let go of what they did, how they did it, whatever it is, that grudge, treat them as they will treat you. The person you are not forgiving, the person you are holding that grudge against, is moving on and forward with their life. While you are stopping yours in hopes of that stopping their life as well. You think that if you stop yourself from moving forward, If you stop yourself from moving on, that will stop them too. That will stop them from moving on too. That will stop them from moving forward too. When really, you holding that grudge, you not forgiving them, is just stopping yours. They're moving forward and they're moving on. And I want to introduce a theory in this episode. I want to introduce an important theory. It's a theory that I've come up with and a theory that I practice all the time and I implement when really I'm struggling to forgive, and it gets me forgiving so much easier. It gets me forgiving so much more. And that theory is called the thank you theory. The thank you theory. The thank you theory really ties well with that reaction, action, and perception idea that we spoke about earlier in the episode. And the thank you theory heavily relies on perception. The thank you theory heavily relies on perception, and that will decide your reaction and your action. So between the reaction and the action, there's always perception, and that decides what you will do about it, how you will feel about it, and how easy you can forgive it. The thank you theory is this: when someone hurts you, when someone betrays you, when someone disappoints you, thank you. Thank you for letting me know. Thank you for showing me. Thank you for making me more aware. That's the thank you theory. When the betrayal comes, when the disappointment comes, when the sadness comes, thank you. And now also, thank you for making it this far. Thank you for making it this far, but you are not making it any further. You are not going up any more levels. This is where you stand. I'm cutting where you stand. So thank you. Thank you for showing me where you stand. And tell yourself this and remind yourself of this. I forgive you, but I don't trust you the same. I won't deal with you the same. I won't give you that same energy and that same amount of myself and that same amount of my life. So you forgive them, but you just won't deal with them the same. You just won't have them at the same level. You won't give them more than they deserve of your life. You won't give them more than what you're comfortable with your life. And we need to know. It's always better to know how they are, where they stand, than to not know at all. It's always better to know how they are and where they stand than to not know at all. The more they show, the more you know. The more they show, the more you know about them and the more you know about yourself. So when they disappoint you, when they betray you, when they upset you, thank you. Forgive them and thank you. And that is the end of this episode. This is the end of episode 5 of the Inner Guidebook. Why you should forgive and how you should forgive. I really enjoyed this talk because I needed those reminders. I enjoyed even the setup for this podcast because I needed those notes for myself. I needed that reminder for myself. Whoever you are trying to forgive, forgive them. Whoever you are struggling to let go of, let them go. You're not doing it for them. You're doing it for you. That's the end of the Inner Guidebook, episode 5. And I'll see you at the next one.